Let's make a pair of earrings using a Byzantine detail. Instead of building off a paper clip, this time we're going to build directly from the earring hook. So on here I've got my usual 3-piece starter, except that since my earring hook is not going to have room for 2 rings, I've just started with 1. And I'm just going to loosely close that for now because I'm going to open it up again to add some chain. Now I want my chain earrings to be just under 3 inches from the top of the hook, and that's a fairly long pair. So to figure out the maximum length of the chain, I'm going to try to line that up against a ruler. And now I know I've got room for about 2 inches of chain. I also want to add some beads to the end, so I should be sure to account for a little bit extra there. Now since I'm going to be making 2 pairs, it's going to be easier if I cut my chain all in one hit. So let's measure off just under 2 inches, and instead of cutting right away, I'm just going to grab one of these rings, fold it in half like that, and that's easier than counting out individual rungs. So now I can just snip those 2 apart and snip at the bottom so that they match completely. So that's the first strand, and to make sorting easier, I'm just going to make sure they stay separate. Now to add a little bit of texture to it, I'm not going to cut all my chains the same length. Instead I'm going to do a couple of shorter ones so that it gives some different falling points for the beads. So this one I might do around 1 inch. Again, I'm going to cut in pairs. So I'll eventually add a bead to the bottom of that. And I'm just going to take a quick look at how the spacing appears. So lining up the tops, getting them roughly straight, they'll hang a little bit like that. So I could aim to have 1 bead in between, or I could do an even shorter one that is at a similar step. You could try some different kinds of chain mixed together. That'll add nice texture to it as well, but I'm just going to use a single one. So that uses 4 rungs of the chain. So for this one I'm just going to use 2, and that one I don't need to compare to cut. I can just easily snip those apart. So this particular chain consists of oval links separated by little circle ones. So I want to make sure that all the tops start the same way and all the bottoms end the same way. So I've ended with the circle ones on all 3, and because I'm going to need to fit them over my large jump ring, I've started with the large oval links at the top. So I'm going to reopen the jump ring on the end, and simply drop the chain onto the jump ring. And now I can close it up for good. Because my chains are quite fine, I need to make sure that I close the jump ring really well. Otherwise they may slip out if they get tugged. Now because the Byzantine area is quite large, it may look better to add extra chains in here to balance out the design. It'll also help since I'm using rings with too large an aspect ratio. They open up if there isn't enough weight. If I were to add a bunch more chains down here, that would help keep a tug on this, which will keep the chain in place. Ideally, you would want to use slightly smaller rings. Now I'm ready to add some beads. I like to do things like this in something of a production line. Rather than wire wrapping each one individually, I'm going to get to the step before I close my wire wrap and just get them all ready to go. So to start with, I've got 3 chains, so I'm just going to add 1 bead to the end of each. I'm just going to start at the bottom and pick up that end link and then just close it up. I could stop there and move on to the second earring, but I think it looks a little lopsided with the large jump rings at the top and the lighter chain at the bottom. So to bulk up the end, I have 2 options. I could add more chain, or I could just continue adding beads to it. I'm going to use some different garnet, and it's a little bit of a different shape just to add some interest to it. But I picked something of the same color just to keep the nice crisp silver and red look to it. So these I'm going to place a little more randomly. I don't want to just add them to the ends of the chains. And I'd rather not have them end up at the same heights as existing ones because I want to fill up the space a little more. So I'm going to try adding them to places that look a little blank. And it doesn't matter if I add to the same chains more than once, because they'll just hang in a cluster. It won't be clear that they're misweighted. That definitely looks more even, and the extra weight of those beads is going to help keep this jump ring section in place. So when I make the next one, I've already got my chains cut. I just need to recreate this top, wrap these larger garnet pieces to the end of the 3 chains, and then carefully match where I've wrapped this smaller garnet so that the 2 earrings match.